Before you judge me, let me explain how I got here. It was my law school graduation. I wore a pale blue dress, ironed it myself that morning, and added a silver necklace my mother gave me when I passed the bar prep. We set up tables in the backyard, string lights, brisket on the smoker, sweet tea in glass pitchers. I thought I was celebrating my future with the man I loved, but instead of a toast, he raised his glass and told everyone he was starting over without me. That moment changed everything. Betrayal doesn't always hide in shadows. Sometimes it smiles beside you in family photos. Stay with me till the end and tell me where you're watching from. I remember the way the sun cut through the tree branches that afternoon. It was warm, but not unbearable. The kind of Texas spring day where you could sit outside with a glass of lemonade and not feel like the heat was chasing you into the shade. My mother had set out folding chairs across the lawn, and my brother Marcus dragged the grill out from the garage, complaining about the propane tank like he always did. Yvette brought cupcakes from that place off Beltline Road I loved so much. The ones with buttercream icing that melted a little too fast, but still felt like childhood in every bite. I had curled my hair early that morning. Nothing fancy, just loose waves and a little spray. I'd been so careful with the dress, the pale blue one I bought months earlier when I imagined how this day would feel. I'd spent years in windowless classrooms, huddled over books while Liam slept in or chased half-hearted business ideas. Still, I believed in us. I believed that after I crossed that stage, we'd finally be building something together. It was my day, or so I thought. I heard the clinking of a spoon against a champagne flute before I saw him. Liam stood by the grill, the apron still hanging loosely around his neck. Grease on his fingers. I smiled at first, thinking he was about to tell one of his goofy stories about how we met. Everyone quieted down, the way you do when someone raises a glass and clears their throat. Even my niece stopped playing with the bubbles floating around her. He looked at me, right at me, and then said, "I've decided to start a new life. Without Jordan." That was it. No build-up, no apology, no eye contact afterward, just a strange little shrug, like he was excusing himself from dinner early, and not from our life. The sound disappeared. I couldn't hear the birds, or the rustle of paper plates, or the low hum of the music we had playing. All I could see were eyes darting between him and me, wondering, calculating, waiting for me to fall apart. Someone gasped. Someone dropped a plastic fork. My cousin mumbled something under her breath. My mother covered her mouth, but I didn't cry. I reached into the side pocket of my tote bag. Not my purse, the bag I use when I need something a little sturdier. I had packed it the night before with a few things I didn't expect to need, but brought anyway. A manila envelope, thick with papers, the corner slightly bent from being shoved in beside my wallet. I stood up, walked over to him, slipped it into the pocket of his apron without saying a word. Then I turned to my guests, my family, my neighbors, my professors and friends. "Thank you all for being here," I said, calmly. "Please stay. There's plenty of food. And this day is still worth celebrating." I stepped away, out through the side gate, onto the driveway, past the balloons, past the banner that read, "Congratulations, Jordan" in gold letters. I unlocked my car with a shaky hand and slid into the driver's seat. Only then did I let my chest rise and fall like I'd been holding my breath the entire afternoon. I didn't go far. Just 2 miles down the road to the empty house my friend Frankie was renting out short-term. He'd offered it to me for a few days of quiet, said I could use it to study or reset. He didn't ask why. He just handed me the keys and said, "You'll know if you need it." I knew. Inside the quiet house, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the edge of the couch, the print of my graduation gown still wrinkled from the dry cleaner's tag. My phone buzzed again and again. Missed calls, messages from my mother, from Marcus, from Liam, from numbers I didn't save anymore. I ignored them all. The betrayal wasn't loud. It wasn't screaming or broken glass or yelling matches. It was the quiet way he'd planned it, like I wouldn't notice, like I wouldn't feel it if he just cut the cord in front of a crowd, pretending it was something brave instead of cruel. But what he didn't realize was that I had seen this coming. Not the exact moment, no, but the slow unraveling had been happening for months. Little lies, missed appointments, unexplained charges, late nights when he said he was at a client's meeting, but came home smelling like a different detergent. I used to think it was stress, that he was pulling away because he didn't feel worthy of my accomplishments. But then I saw the receipt, a boutique downtown, one I'd never stepped foot in, a necklace sterling silver, not my style, wrapped and signed with a note that said, "For all the nights you waited for me," and I knew that wasn't for me. I spent the next 6 weeks paying attention, not reacting, watching his patterns, collecting proof, not because I wanted to humiliate him, but because I wanted to protect myself from the story he might try to tell. I wasn't going to be cast as the bitter ex-fiancée, the woman who just couldn't balance it all, the one who drove him away. No, that script had been written too many times, and I had edited enough of them in my head already. So I called an attorney. I opened a separate account. I canceled the lease we were about to sign, the one he thought we'd co-signed, but I never mailed in. I made copies, emails, bank transfers, social media DMs. I saved the message from the florist that confirmed a delivery to Camila Navarro's address, the woman whose name had appeared 3 times on his search history, and finally, I wrote a letter. A full accounting of what I knew, what I had seen, and what I planned to do. It was signed, dated, and sealed, and it was in that envelope. So when he chose that moment, my moment, to announce his departure like he was doing something noble, all I had to do was hand him the next chapter. He thought he was ending something. He didn't realize I'd already started writing the ending myself. I didn't sleep much that first night. Frankie's little house was quiet. With its creaky floorboards and humming fridge, I lay on the couch, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me. Every hour or so, I reached for my phone, thinking maybe I'd missed a call from someone who mattered, someone who wanted the truth, not gossip, but the notifications were the same. Missed calls from Liam, voicemails I didn't bother playing, a few texts from my mom that started soft and ended sharp. Call me. Come home. Why are you doing this to yourself? I was always the obedient one, the calm one, the one who didn't cause trouble. Liam used to joke that I could make an IRS audit sound polite, but that wasn't a compliment. Not really. It was a way of saying I made myself small enough not to provoke discomfort. That version of me was gone. By sunrise, I had made a decision. I showered, pulled on a pair of jeans, and drove to my mother's house. I figured if I was going to be dragged through the fire, I might as well do it on my own terms. Her porch light was still on when I arrived. It always was. Even in daylight, a habit from my grandmother, who used to say it was for the ones who need to find their way back. I stepped onto the porch and took a breath before knocking. She opened the door fast, like she'd been waiting. "Jordan," she said. Her voice clipped. Thank God. I stepped inside. The smell of cinnamon and coffee was strong, but it didn't feel warm. She didn't hug me, just stood there with her arms folded like I was some unruly guest. She pointed toward the kitchen. "Sit." I obeyed. Though everything inside me wanted to run, she poured coffee into a chipped mug and placed it in front of me without asking if I wanted it. "You embarrassed us," she said, her voice quiet but sharp. I looked at her. "Us. Your aunt flew in from Arizona. Marcus brought that girl he's dating. Everyone was here for you." "For me?" "Yes," she snapped, "and instead of a celebration, they watched your fiancé walk out like he was escaping a hostage situation." I let her words land, but I didn't interrupt. I let the silence sit between us until it was heavy enough to choke on. He wasn't escaping. I said, "He was announcing something he thought I'd be too stunned to answer." My mother sat across from me, her eyes narrowing. "And what did you think you were doing handing him that envelope? Was that your big moment?" "No," I said, my voice steady. My big moment was deciding not to let someone rewrite my story while I stood by and smiled through it. She blinked. The words didn't hit her the way they'd hit me. "I raised you to be strong," she said. "No," I replied, gently. "You raised me to be quiet. There's a difference." She looked like she might slap the table, but instead, she stood up and walked to the sink. She didn't say another word. So, I left. I didn't owe anyone an apology, not for saving myself. Later that day, I met with my attorney, Elena. She was 10 years older than me and had a face that made people tell the truth without realizing it. She wore neutral colors and kept her nails short and clean. She didn't blink much. I liked that. She opened the folder I'd given her the week before and nodded as she scanned through my notes. "You've documented everything," she said. Impressed, I nodded. "I've had time." She looked up. "You sure you want to go through with this?" "He didn't hit you. He didn't take out a mortgage in your name. It wasn't illegal." "No," I said. "Just dishonest, manipulative, calculated. That counts. Doesn't it?" She nodded once. "It counts." We went over options. No shared property, no kids, but there were shared accounts, overlapping debts, and that small joint investment in the coffee shop Liam swore would be the next big thing, and which turned out to be nothing more than a vanity project he abandoned 3 months in. Elena agreed to send a formal letter to Liam's attorney by week's end. I'd get my name off the lease. I'd separate my credit. I'd protect what was mine. As I was leaving her office, she stopped me. "Jordan," she said, "not many women come in here this prepared, this calm. Most are either crying or boiling." I smiled, a little sadly. I did all that already. Now I'm just ready, back at Frankie's. I let myself breathe for the first time that day. I peeled off my jeans, curled into a blanket, and stared at the ceiling fan again. But this time, I didn't feel alone. I wasn't broken. I was processing. Later that night, my cousin Yvette stopped by with leftover brisket and a 6-pack of root beer. "Girl," she said, dropping onto the couch, "you lit that man up like the 4th of July." I laughed. It felt strange and good. He deserved it. "Oh, I know," she said, opening 2 bottles. But the rest of us were just trying to eat coleslaw without choking. We talked for hours about Liam, about family, about how people like to pretend betrayal is subtle, but it never is. It just comes dressed up in manners. Before she left, she squeezed my hand. "You didn't ruin anything, Jordan. You just refused to be ruined." I nodded. "Thanks for knowing the difference." That night, I slept. For the first time in weeks, I let my shoulders drop into the mattress and drifted off without the weight of pretending. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Frankie was already gone off to her rotation at the medical center. She left a sticky note on the fridge that said, "You're stronger than you think. Don't let their silence shake you." I smiled and tucked it in my wallet next to the copy of my bar results, a quiet kind of courage just enough to keep going. By noon, I had a meeting with Dean Harwell at the university's Career Center. Before all this, I had been planning to start a clerkship with Judge Patel in the fall. It was a dream opportunity, but now my name was tangled in whispers. My graduation speech had been replaced by, "Did you hear what happened with Jordan and Liam?" I wasn't naive. Law school gossip had claws, and the people who shook my hand last week wouldn't all be waiting when the dust settled. Still, I showed up. Dean Harwell was kind in the way older people are when they know you've been through something messy, but don't ask for details. He offered me tea instead of coffee and asked how I was holding up. "I'm adjusting," I said honestly. He nodded, then tapped the folder in front of him. "I'm not going to pretend I haven't heard the noise," he said. "But that's all it is, noise. What matters is your record, your work, and your ability to show up despite what life throws your way." I swallowed the tightness in my throat. His words felt like scaffolding around a house that hadn't fallen yet but was close. "I appreciate that," I said. "Judge Patel called me this morning." He continued. "Asked if your personal situation would interfere with your work. I tensed, and I told her no," he added, looking me square in the eye. "Because you've never once let your personal life bleed into your professional integrity. It took everything I had not to cry in that office by the time I left." He had forwarded my final transcripts and 2 glowing letters of recommendation. My start date was still intact, My career, at least, hadn't been dismantled by the spectacle of Liam's betrayal, but the rest of my life. That was still being sorted. That evening, I went to gather what was mine from the apartment Liam and I had shared. The lease was in both our names, but I'd already spoken with the landlord. With legal backing and Elena's letter, it was a clean separation. No drama, just signatures and deadlines. Still, I dreaded walking in. The place was eerily quiet. I half expected Liam to be there, but he wasn't. He'd taken his clothes, his electronics, his guitars left the couch, the coffee table, and the fake fiddle leaf fig plant I hated. The dishes were still in the sink. I started boxing up my things methodically. Books, binders, bar prep notes, a few candles, and the vintage record player we bought together at a street fair 2 summers ago. I found a receipt tucked in the lid, my signature, not his. I smiled at that. In the bedroom. The bed was stripped. My side table was untouched. A small photo sat on it, one of me and my dad at my college graduation. I hadn't seen that photo in over a year. He passed away 6 months before law school started. That smile on my face, I hadn't seen that version of myself in a long time. I put the photo in my purse and kept going. As I packed, I thought about what Frankie said the night before, that not all betrayals come from loud moments. Some come from quiet ones, inaction, avoidance, neglect. Liam hadn't just cheated on me with some faceless affair. No, his betrayal was more thorough. It was the deliberate erasure of me from his future. The way he'd spent months quietly building a life I wasn't part of. While telling me he loved me every night, that's the kind of betrayal that doesn't scream at whispers. Around 7 p.m., there was a knock at the door. It was Callie, my former classmate and one of Liam's closest friends. I opened the door cautiously. "Hey," she said. "I wasn't sure if you'd still be here." I stepped aside and let her in. She looked uncomfortable, like someone walking into a church after a scandal. "I'm not here to fight," she said quickly. I wanted to say something. Off the record. I nodded. Silent. I knew about the girl. She admitted. Not all the details. Just that Liam was talking to someone. I thought it was nothing. I figured he was blowing off steam. I didn't think he'd actually leave you. "Did you tell him he was making a mistake?" I asked. My voice calm but firm. Callie looked away. "No. I told him he needed to be honest with himself, that if he wasn't happy, he shouldn't stay." I nodded. That hurt, but it was honest. Brutally so. "You were always the one who had it all together," she said, and I think that scared him. I raised an eyebrow. "He felt like you didn't need him," she added. I wanted to laugh. Need him? I had spent the last 2 years carrying both our student loans, cooking every meal, and typing his cover letters after proofreading my own. Need wasn't the issue. Dependability was. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," Callie finished. "I should have said something sooner." I nodded again. "Thank you for telling me now." She left quietly, and I finished packing. By midnight, the apartment was bare. I sat on the floor and stared at the empty living room. So many nights were spent here. Nights full of ambition, late-night arguments, silly movies, and plans whispered under blankets. And yet, none of it had held. I texted the landlord and told him the keys would be in the drop box by morning. Then I walked out the door and didn't look back. At Frankie's, I made tea and sat on the back porch, watching the stars. I thought about everything I had lost and everything I hadn't. I still had my future. I still had my mind. I still had the quiet, unshakable belief that I deserved love that didn't come with expiration dates or exit strategies, and maybe, just maybe, I'd start learning how to give that love to myself first. It had been 3 weeks since I moved in with Frankie. The space between then and now was filled with quiet routines and simple recoveries, unpacking one box at a time, brewing coffee before sunrise, learning the shape of my days without Liam's voice in them. There were no dramatic gestures, no tearful declarations, just silence and the quiet rebuild of my dignity. I started waking early to run again, just a couple of miles each morning around the block. Not to change anything about myself, but to prove to my body that I still had momentum, that I wasn't frozen in time like that backyard moment when Liam lifted his glass and shattered mine. Frankie had a small chalkboard in the kitchen where she used to write affirmations when she was cramming for exams. One morning, I found this written in her loopy print: "You're not what they left. You're what they couldn't keep." I stood staring at that for a long time, a tea mug warm between my palms. There was something deeply painful and oddly freeing in realizing that the day after. My mother called. We hadn't spoken much since the graduation. Her voice was careful, tentative. She asked how I was doing, then asked if I was ready to talk things through, which really meant, "Are you ready to hear my version of what happened?" I agreed to meet her for lunch at Lou's Diner, halfway between her house and Frankie's. I chose a booth by the window. The waitress brought water with lemon slices floating on top. I watched them swirl and dissolve as I waited. My mother arrived 10 minutes late. Dressed in a linen blouse and pearls, she looked untouched by scandal. I, on the other hand, felt like my insides were still drying out from a flood. "Hi, sweetie," she said, sliding in across from me like this was a normal day. I didn't hug her. "How are you?" she asked. "I'm all right," I said, folding my napkin in half. "Are you?" She gave a tight smile. "It's been difficult. You know your father hasn't stopped defending Liam." I didn't respond. I let the silence do the talking. "I told him it wasn't the time or place," she continued, "but he said it was Liam's right to speak his truth." My stomach tightened. "His truth," I repeated slowly. "You mean his public humiliation of me in front of friends and family, Jordan?" she said, leaning in like I was being dramatic. "He didn't lie. He said he wasn't happy, that he wanted something different, and you thought that was best delivered over potato salad and sparklers." She didn't answer. For a few seconds, we just sat there, watching each other through thick, unspoken history. "I didn't know ahead of time," she finally said, but I also wasn't surprised. That sentence knocked the wind out of me more than I expected. "What does that mean?" I asked. She looked at me, her eyes sad. "You always had a way of pushing people too hard, of being sharp. Not everyone wants to feel like they're being tested all the time." My throat closed. It was like being 14 again, listening to her tell me that my standards were too high, that I asked too many questions, that boys liked girls who smiled more. Liam was soft. She continued, "You were flint. I was focused." I said quietly, "There's a difference." She sighed. "You just always seemed like you were chasing something bigger, like the life we gave you wasn't enough." There it was. The old resentment wrapped in concern, the way she'd always painted my ambition as rejection. I reached for my bag, pulled out a check, and slid it across the table. It was the remainder of the deposit for the graduation party. "I want you to have this," I said. "You paid for the tent and the chairs. It was your money's, not mine." She looked startled. "You don't need to, I do," I said, standing, because I'm done letting people think my silence is acceptance. I left the diner without dessert. Outside, the wind had picked up. The clouds were low and gray like something big was coming, but I kept walking, because for the first time in a long time, I didn't need shelter, I needed movement. That night, I called Elena. "Hey," I said, "I think I'm ready to go public." There was a pause. "You sure I am?" I said, "Not with drama, but with truth." The next day, I wrote a letter to the school paper. It was short, direct, and composed with the kind of clarity that only comes after you've been silenced long enough to really choose your words. I told the story, not with venom, but with precision. I described the graduation, the betrayal, the fact that I had been navigating law school while supporting someone who left me in the middle of my own milestone. I ended the letter with this line: "Closure doesn't come from waiting for an apology. It comes from reclaiming the mic." Elena made sure it was published online and in print. Within 24 hours, the post had over 14,000 views. My inbox was flooded, messages from classmates I barely knew, from alumni, from women who said, "This happened to me, too." Not the same way, but the same heartbreak, and a message from Judge Patel. "Jordan, I read your letter. I want you to know I still expect you in chambers this fall. Integrity is easier to recognize than most people think. I sat on the edge of Frankie's couch with tears in my eyes. I hadn't lost everything. Some things were only just beginning, and I was starting to understand that the kind of woman who can stand still during her own unmaking is the same woman who can build something even stronger with the rubble. A week after the letter was published, I ran into Liam at Carter's Market. I'd gone in for oat milk and came out with a reminder that some people look different when they've been exposed. He was standing near the citrus bins, holding a lemon like he'd forgotten what it was for. I should have kept walking, but when he turned and saw me, I knew there was no escape. "Jordan," he said, adjusting the collar of his navy jacket, "I wasn't expecting you." I nodded. "I shop here." He blinked like I'd spoken in code. He looked thinner, more tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual confident stance had shrunk a little, the kind of shrinking that happens when your narrative slips out of your hands and people stop clapping for you. "I saw the piece," he said. I didn't answer. I wanted to see what he'd do with the silence this time. He shifted the lemon from one hand to the other. "You really think I betrayed you?" There it was. That word, think, as if betrayal was subjective, as if I had somehow misread the moment when he announced our split during my own graduation celebration, like it was a clever PR stunt. "I don't think it—" "Liam," I said quietly, "I lived it." He looked down. "I didn't mean for it to happen that way." He said after a moment, "I just panicked. I felt trapped, and I figured if I waited longer, I'd never do it. So you thought humiliating me in front of 60 people was a better option." His shoulders slumped. "I thought you'd be okay. You've always been okay." That stung more than I expected, because I knew exactly what he meant, that he thought I was made of something tougher than grief, that he assumed I'd absorb the blow and still clean up the mess. I was okay. I said, "Eventually, but you never asked what it cost me." We stood in the middle of the aisle, surrounded by oranges and avocados, like we were frozen in an argument 2 years overdue. Liam sighed. "I didn't come here to fight. Neither did I." I said, "But here we are." He stepped aside, letting me pass. I walked away with my oat milk and my head held high. I didn't need to look back. Some goodbyes don't need closure, just space. Later that night, I found myself scrolling through messages again. There was one from a woman named Nadine. She was 63 and had gone through a divorce 2 years prior. She wrote, "You don't know me, but I read your story. My ex left me the night before our 35th anniversary. Said he wanted adventure. What you wrote, it gave me back my spine. Thank you." I sat back, holding my phone to my chest. That message stayed with me for days. I began writing more. Not just posts or letters, but entries, journal pages that turned into essays. I didn't publish them, not yet, but they were real, my voice on paper, my truth, unclipped. Frankie started calling it my restoration file. One Saturday morning, I was sitting at her kitchen table working on another entry when she came in with 2 mugs of coffee and a grin. "You got mail," she said, setting a letter in front of me. It was from the office of the clerk at Raleigh County Family Court. I opened it with shaky fingers. Inside was a brief, formal notice. Liam had filed a petition to remove my name from the lease on the apartment we once shared. His reason, financial independence and emotional finality. I almost laughed. It wasn't enough to leave me. He wanted to erase me, line by line. But what he didn't know was that I'd already requested a formal lease separation through my attorney 2 weeks prior. He was late to the paperwork just like he'd always been late to anything that wasn't about him. Frankie leaned over and read the letter. He's scrambling. I nodded. It's like watching a magician realize the crowd's seen the wires. That afternoon, I decided I wasn't going to let his reaction be the final word. I met with my old professor, Dr. Evelyn Grant. She taught constitutional law and had always been the kind of woman who could shut down a courtroom with one raised brow. "You've got more fire now than you did in class." She told me over tea, "You should channel it." I've been thinking about advocacy work. I said, domestic partners, public accountability, something that actually helps women speak when they've been shut down. She nodded. "Good. We need more voices like yours. She invited me to guest lecture in one of her advanced classes the following month. That invitation lit something in me I hadn't felt since before graduation, a sense that maybe all of this pain wasn't just about surviving. Maybe it was pointing me toward purpose. 3 days later, I drove back to my childhood home, not for forgiveness. For my things, my parents had boxed them already. 2 plastic tubs and a suitcase, lined up in the hallway like they couldn't wait to reclaim the space I once filled. My mother handed me the last box, her expression unreadable. "I hope you find peace, Jordan," she said. "I already did," I replied, then turned to leave. As I walked back to the car, I passed the magnolia tree I used to read under as a kid. I paused, took a breath, and whispered thank you to the girl I once was, who dreamed big and loved hard, even when it cost her. That night, I unpacked those boxes slowly. Each item felt like a puzzle piece returning to its rightful place. My law degree, my framed copy of The Color Purple, the photo of me and Elena, arms slung around each other in our first year. These weren't leftovers. They were reminders of who I'd been and who I was becoming. By mid-September, the heat finally broke. It was the kind of crisp morning that made you want to start over. I cracked the window open just enough to let the scent of damp leaves in. My apartment still smelled faintly of cardboard and new paint, but the silence was different now, less like loneliness, more like peace. I made coffee. No second cup for someone else, no worrying if the creamer was oat or dairy. Just mine, and it was enough. That week, I started my first volunteer shift at Harmony Haven, a women's resource center just outside of Raleigh. My old law school colleague, Denise, had connected me to them after reading my story. They needed help with legal literacy workshops, women who had been displaced, manipulated, or silenced, many without the tools to protect themselves legally. The first group I met was small, 5 women in folding chairs, eyes wary, hands fidgeting with tissues or coffee lids. Their stories varied: emotional abuse, financial coercion, betrayal by family members or longtime partners, but the thread that bound them was familiar. Each had been told, in some way. "You don't matter enough to fight for." I stood at the front, palms a little sweaty, heart too loud in my chest. "I'm not here as a lawyer." I began softly. "I'm here as someone who had to learn too late what I should have known sooner." That got their attention. "I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to hand you back your voice." That afternoon, something shifted inside me. I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was passing the torch, and it felt like I was finally home in my own skin after the session. One of the women, Latasha, waited until the others had left. My ex took out a credit card in my name. She said, "Ran it up. I found out when they garnished my wages." "Do you have a copy of the statements?" I asked. She nodded, pulling a folded envelope from her purse like it was radioactive. I took it gently. "Let's fix this." Later that evening, I sat with Frankie on her porch swing, our legs wrapped in mismatched blankets, sipping hot cider like we used to in college when we were broke but hopeful. "You're different," she said, nudging me gently. "How so lighter, like your story isn't weighing you down anymore." I looked up at the stars. Maybe it's because it's not just mine anymore. If it helps someone else carry their own, then it wasn't for nothing. Frankie smiled. "You always had this quiet kind of strength, but now you're loud about it." I let that sit for a moment. I hadn't been loud about much before, but maybe it was time. The next day, I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed. It was Amelia, one of Liam's sisters. We hadn't spoken since the breakup. Not even a text, so I hesitated before answering. "Hi, Amelia." She let out a long breath. I wasn't sure if I should call. I waited. I wanted you to know. I didn't agree with what Liam did. None of us did. And I'm sorry I didn't reach out sooner. I was embarrassed and angry at him, at myself. Her voice cracked. "I read your story," she added quietly, "and I want to help. If there's anything I can do, legal work, admin, whatever, I'm here." I felt something soften in my chest. Forgiveness didn't have to be loud either. Sometimes it started as a thread, a willingness to hear someone out, Thank you, Amelia. That means a lot. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing big, just enough to start again, if we chose to. After I hung up, I looked around my apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The rug in the living room had a coffee stain from when I dropped my mug during a thunderstorm. The curtains didn't match the couch. The bookshelf leaned slightly to the left, but I had paid for every piece with money I earned, with choices I made. No one else got to take credit. That night, I pulled out a notebook one Frankie had gifted me weeks ago. The cover said, "Begin again." I opened it to the first page and wrote, in slow block letters, "I am not the ending. I am the rewrite." Then I started mapping out the next phase of my life, not a 5-year plan, not a fantasy, just the next few real steps. File incorporation paperwork for a nonprofit, finalize the workshop curriculum, reach out to the woman who emailed last week about setting up a financial literacy program in her church. This wasn't about proving anything to Liam, or to my parents, or even to the ghost of who I used to be. It was about standing where I was, looking at the wreckage and saying, this will become something. It already had. 1 week later, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single line. You turned the weapon into a key. Thank you. No name, no signature, just that. And it was enough. 3 days after the letter arrived, I got a message from Maya, the Harmony Haven director. We got a request from a local women's shelter. She said, they want to pilot your workshop series. Start with 5 women. Once a week. You in? I blinked at the screen for a second. The cursor hovered over the reply box. Yes. 1 word. But it felt like I just agreed to step into the person I was always meant to become. The first session was in the basement of an old Presbyterian church on the east side of town. Low ceilings, mismatched folding chairs, and a heater that clanked every few minutes. But none of that mattered. What mattered were the women. April, a quiet 22-year-old with a toddler and a restraining order. Megan, mid-30s, hadn't touched her own bank card in 5 years. Linda, 61, left after 40 years of marriage with nothing but a suitcase and her grandmother's rosary, and 2 others who didn't share their names but came anyway. That was brave enough. I opened my binder, palms steady this time. We're not here to rehash pain. I told them, we're here to rewrite power. Their eyes met mine, some cautious, others curious. We start with one truth. What happened to you is not your fault. What happens next, that's yours to shape. We talked credit reports, legal aid, lease agreements. I gave them checklists, yes, but I also gave them something else, something I hadn't realized I was carrying. Hope. After the session, April waited by the door. I want to open a cleaning business, she said softly. Nothing fancy, just me and a mop and something that's mine. I reached into my bag, pulled out a clean worksheet I'd prepped. Then let's build your startup budget. Her eyes lit up. Not big, not dramatic, but enough. Later that week, I finally heard from my father. I hadn't told him everything, not yet. But somehow, I think he knew. His message was brief. Just, call me when you can. I miss your voice. So I did. He answered on the first ring. I read the article. He said, I waited. I'm sorry. Jordan. For all the times I doubted you, for letting your mother speak over your strength. My breath hitched. I didn't know I'd needed to hear that until he said it. Dad, no excuses. He cut in gently. Just love, just that. And I realized something else. The healing didn't have to be loud either. Sometimes it began with a whisper, an apology wrapped in warmth, a father remembering how to be one. That Sunday, I joined him for dinner at a small barbecue place in Durham. We sat in a booth with sticky menus and plastic red cups. He ordered ribs. I got the brisket. For the first time in months, we talked like people instead of puzzle pieces that no longer fit. He asked about the shelter, the classes, the women. You always had this fire in you, he said between bites. I think we just didn't know how to handle it. I smiled. I didn't always know either. After dinner, he handed me a check. I know you don't need help, but I want to support your nonprofit when it launches. Not because I pity you, Because I believe in you." I stared at the number. It wasn't massive, but it was more than just money. It was recognition. It was someone seeing me not as what I'd lost, but what I'd become. I tucked the check into my purse. "Thank you, Dad." That night, I sat in my apartment and wrote the first mission statement for the nonprofit I'd dreamed about since law school. I called it Reclaim Legal, short, strong, and true. Our mission to equip women with the tools, language, and legal protection to rewrite the contracts of their lives. It felt like breathing. The next morning, I got an email from someone I didn't expect. "Liam." Subject line: "For what it's worth, the body was short. I heard what you're doing, and I know I don't deserve your time, but I wanted to say I was wrong about everything. I hope you're okay. I hope you're more than okay." I stared at the screen for a long time. He didn't ask to talk. He didn't try to twist the knife. And that was new. I didn't reply. Not because I hated him. I didn't. But because closure didn't always come with a conversation. Sometimes it was a quiet nod to the past and a firm grip on the present. That week, I spoke at a local community college about legal autonomy and young women's rights. After the talk, a professor approached me, Dr. Madison Cho. She offered me an adjunct position teaching a short course on women in the law, real-world empowerment. She said, "Not just textbooks." I accepted on the spot. I went home that night, looked at my reflection in the mirror, and for the first time in almost a year, I saw someone whole, not shattered, not left behind, but sculpted through fire, through watha, through starting again. Frankie called that night. "Giddy. Girl, I just ran into Noah at the co-op. He said your workshop is getting funding from the county council." "What, yep. Some commissioner's wife attended a class, and now it's on their agenda." I laughed, really laughed. And I realized this was what rising felt like, not a single moment of triumph, but 100 small victories stitched together. Jordan Elise Rivera, 27, survivor, advocate, founder. I wasn't the girl who got left behind on the lawn in a blue dress anymore. I was the woman who built her own table, invited others to sit, and lit the fire under it. And the best part, I hadn't even started yet. By the time the county council approved the seed grant, I was already running on momentum. The pilot program was in its 5th week. We'd expanded from 5 women to 11. Word was spreading through shelters, clinics, and church basements. Every Wednesday night, I stood in front of a folding table in borrowed spaces, holding space for women who had been told they were too emotional, too loud, too broken to be heard. Not anymore, and not on my watch. The day after the grant approval, I received an official letter, $15,000. Enough to print materials, hire part-time legal interns, and finally get proper childcare coverage during workshops. For so many of these women, it wasn't fear holding them back. It was logistics. No one to watch the baby while they filed a police report, no bus fare to the courthouse, so I removed the barriers, one by one, the same way I had to do for myself. Frankie surprised me with cupcakes that night, red velvet with cream cheese frosting and gold sprinkles. "For the warrior queen," she said. Raising a plastic flute of sparkling cider, we stood in my tiny kitchen, a space no bigger than the one I'd grown up in, and toasted to starting over. Not with spite, but with purpose. 2 days later, while reviewing case prep for a woman fighting for full custody, I got an email from the Carolina Women's Journal. They wanted to interview me for a profile series called She Rises. I blinked at the screen for a while, then forwarded the request to Maya, my mentor turned guardian angel. Her response came back with one line, "Say yes. Your story is the work." So I did. The interview was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. A photographer came too. I wore a navy blouse and clipped my hair back, not fancy, just polished. Present, myself. The journalist, a kind-eyed woman named Clara, started with basic questions: my background, the mission of Reclaim Legal, what inspired it. But somewhere in the middle, her tone shifted. "Was there a moment?" she asked gently. "When you realized your pain had a purpose?" I hesitated. There it was, the wound beneath the armor. I think. I began slowly. The moment he raised that champagne glass and told our families he was leaving, I realized something. That I'd been waiting for permission to become myself, and maybe pain was what finally gave me the key. Clara was silent, her recorder blinking red between us. I continued, but it wasn't the betrayal that defined me. It was what came after. It was choosing not to shrink, not to disappear. It was realizing I was still here, and that was enough to begin. She thanked me for the interview, hugged me like an old friend, and said the feature would run in the April issue. When the article came out, something unexpected happened. Messages, hundreds of them, emails, letters, comments on the Reclaim Legal page, from women in small towns and big cities, from grandmothers and teenagers, from women still married, still stuck, still hoping someone would see them. They had, because I had spoken. Frankie helped me sort through the messages, tears in her eyes. You didn't just tell your story, she said. You handed people a map. Then came the biggest surprise yet. An invitation to speak at the North Carolina Women in Justice Conference. The keynote panel, audience over 500 women in law, policy, and public service. Maya texted first, "You're ready." But I wasn't sure. I stared at the email for hours, unsure if I could stand on that stage without shaking. Frankie, as usual, had no patience for my hesitation. "Jordan Elise Rivera," she said, "do not make me drag you to that podium myself." I laughed through the nerves, and I said yes. The weeks leading up to the conference flew by. I refined my talking points, practiced in the mirror, made note cards, then ditched them. This had to come from my heart. The day of the conference, I wore a cream blazer with black trousers, my grandmother's watch, lip gloss, not lipstick. I didn't want to wear a mask. I wanted to be seen. I stood backstage, breathing slowly, when I got a text, Amelia. The first one since the graduation disaster nearly a year ago. It read, "I'm here. 3rd row. You've got this." Tears prickled behind my eyes. I swallowed hard and walked out. The lights were bright. The microphone hummed. I stood in the center of the stage and told the truth about love that became a weapon, about silence that almost stole me, and about finding myself again not in a courtroom or a love story, but in the quiet, unglamorous work of showing up for myself and for others. The audience rose at the end. I don't remember the applause. I just remember spotting Amelia clapping, crying, and smiling all at once. Later, we sat on a bench outside the venue, eating tacos from a food truck. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "for how everything went down, for believing him, for freezing you out." I reached for her hand. "You were grieving, too." I whispered, "We both lost someone we thought we knew." She nodded, her voice small. "But I don't want to lose you, too." "You won't," I promised. "We're rebuilding." Just like this. The sun dipped behind the city skyline. For the first time in ages, I felt peace. Not triumph, not revenge, just peace. Because what I'd built, what I was still building, wasn't just justice. It was wholeness. It was community. It was the voice I had buried long ago, finally speaking without fear. The next morning, Amelia and I had breakfast together at a corner diner 2 blocks from the conference hotel. I ordered eggs over medium. She had banana pancakes like she used to when she was little. She told me about her new job at the publishing house, her tiny apartment with creaky floors, and the way she'd started scribbling poetry again on the backs of napkins. "It's not great." She laughed. "But it's mine." I smiled, cupping my coffee with both hands. "That's what matters, that it's yours." We sat for almost 2 hours. No rush, no pressure. Just 2 women learning how to be family again. Before we parted, Amelia reached into her bag and handed me a small, gift-wrapped box. "Don't open it now," she said. "Wait till you're home." I tucked it into my purse and hugged her tight at the curb. As she walked away, her coat flapping in the breeze, I realized something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. I wasn't just healing, I was whole, back home that evening. I sat cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, still in my conference clothes, and opened the box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a miniature gavel. Tucked beneath it was a note in Amelia's familiar cursive. "You didn't just win, you changed the courtroom." I held the bracelet in my palm, letting the weight of her words settle into my chest. The next few weeks moved quickly. Reclaim Legal received a flood of new inquiries after the conference. We had to create a wait list for the first time. Frankie began formal training to lead satellite workshops in Raleigh, and a law student from my alma mater asked if she could intern over the summer. Meanwhile, I received a formal letter from Gregory's attorney. He was requesting a mediation date, one last attempt to avoid a full court hearing. His tone had shifted from smug to nervous. The letter mentioned Cassandra had moved out permanently and that he was open to reasonable discussion. I stared at the page, remembering the man who once held my hand during my father's funeral, who promised me loyalty in a whispered vow under falling magnolia petals. Now that man was pleading for mercy through paper. Frankie and I prepared for mediation with military precision. We organized every financial document, every digital trail, every audio file. We didn't want revenge. We wanted resolution. The day of mediation arrived on a gray and windy Thursday. I wore dark green, strong, steady. Gregory looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in presence. His suit hung loose, his eyes darted constantly. "Jordan," he said, standing as I entered. "You look prepared." I finished for him. He nodded, hands fumbling with his pen. The mediator, a retired judge named Eva McMillan, wasted no time. She laid out the terms: financial disclosures, property division, retirement accounts. Gregory's lawyer, a stern man with a cautious tone, tried to push back on the prenup again. "I'd remind you," I said gently, "that this clause has been upheld twice already." Judge McMillan raised an eyebrow. "Do you wish to proceed with mediation or return to court, Gregory?" Looked at me, shoulders slumping. I want to keep my business." "You can," I replied calmly. "No one's taking it, but you'll need to buy out my share of our jointly invested funds used to launch it." He flinched. I continued, "And I want full ownership of the Asheville house. You never even lived there." He opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. In the end, we reached an agreement. I retained 80% of our joint savings, full rights to the house, and half of Gregory's pension contributions during the marriage. He kept his business and a modest personal account. It wasn't about draining him. It was about acknowledging the cost of silence I'd endured for years. When we left the mediation room, Gregory followed me to the elevator. "You really rebuilt everything," he said, almost in wonder. "No," I said, turning to face him. "I built it, for the first time, with no one standing behind me, no one taking credit, just me." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I was wrong," he said, "about so much." "I know," I replied, "but it's not my job to carry that anymore." As the elevator doors closed, he looked like he wanted to say more, but the moment passed. Back home, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like months, not because I had won, but because I had finished it. I had walked every mile of that path and come out the other side. The next Saturday, we hosted a Reclaim Legal community potluck. Over 40 women came: clients, supporters, volunteers. The room was full of laughter, homemade casseroles, and paper cups filled with ginger ale and hope. One woman, a former client named Rhonda, stood up near the end and tapped her glass with a spoon. "I just want to say," she said, "this program saved my life, and not just legally. It made me believe I still mattered." She looked at me, eyes brimming. "You gave me my voice back." I smiled, blinking back tears. "You always had it, Rhonda. You just needed someone to turn up the volume." That night, as I cleaned up crumbs and packed leftover potato salad into old yogurt containers, I felt something settle in me. Not pride, not even peace, but certainty. I was where I was meant to be, and not a single step of the journey, even the ugly parts, had been wasted. The night after the potluck, I stayed up late folding chairs and listening to old soul records on low volume. The final dishes had been scrubbed, the floor swept, and the front porch light clicked off. I was alone in the quiet, truly alone but not lonely. The kind of solitude I felt was different now. It wasn't abandonment. It was ownership. At around 11:30, I sat at my desk and opened a document I hadn't dared to touch in months. It was a personal essay I'd started the night Gregory left. A raw, unfiltered letter to myself that began with one line: "You are allowed to choose yourself." I finished it that night. It wasn't polished. It wasn't meant for publication. But it said what needed to be said. The next morning, I sent it to Amelia. 2 hours later, she replied, "Mom, you need to share this with the world." I wasn't sure I had the stomach for it, but I trusted her instincts, always had. So I sent it anonymously to a small online women's publication, nothing flashy. Just a blog that focused on stories of strength after loss. Within a week, it had been shared 30,000 times. I got emails from people in Mississippi, Montana, even New Hampshire. Women in their 20s, 50s, 70s, some had walked away from infidelity. Others were still trapped in quiet marriages that made them feel invisible. They weren't asking for advice. They just wanted to be seen. It changed something in me. I stopped seeing my pain as something to hide. I started recognizing it as something I could use. Reclaim Legal launched a newsletter called After the Storm. We featured survivor stories, Q&As, financial tips. And once a month, I published a short essay under my full name. One of them was titled "The Woman Who Left with Dignity." I didn't expect the reaction. 2 months later, I was asked to speak at a women's advocacy conference in San Diego. Then came a radio interview, then a podcast. I never set out to be a public voice, but somehow, telling my story made other people feel less alone, and I couldn't turn away from that. Meanwhile, Gregory's silence became its own answer. I hadn't heard from him since mediation. His business had reportedly downsized. Cassandra, I learned, had moved to Florida and started dating a retired orthopedic surgeon. Sometimes karma doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it just closes the door behind you. One morning, as I walked out of my office, a woman was waiting on the front bench, staring at her hands. "Ms. Rivera?" she asked softly. "I am. Can I help you?" She introduced herself. Her name was Dana, late 20s, newly separated, 2 kids. Her voice trembled when she said, "I've been reading your writing. I don't have much, but I need help." I sat beside her. "You have more than you think. We didn't sign paperwork that day. We just talked." I listened to her whole story. Her betrayal didn't look exactly like mine, but it felt the same. That was the gift of this whole journey. Realizing the shape of betrayal didn't matter as much as the shape of healing. You didn't have to match my steps. You just had to keep walking. By the end of summer, Reclaim Legal had partnered with 2 shelters and launched a fund for women escaping financial abuse. Amelia helped with branding and outreach. Frankie handled operations. I stayed focused on the one thing I'd become known for: guiding women back to their voices. That fall, I returned to Charleston for a speaking engagement. It was the first time I'd been back since the graduation party. As I drove past the old neighborhood, I saw the house Gregory and I had once toured, the one he secretly tried to buy with Cassandra. It sat empty now, a for sale sign crooked on the lawn. I pulled over, just for a moment, and I smiled, not because I wanted it anymore, but because I didn't. Later that night, I called Amelia. "Guess where I am?" She laughed. "Let me guess. Eating shrimp and grits at that place with the string lights." "Close? Just left the pier, watching the lights shimmer across the water." "You sound good." "I am," I said, and meant it. She paused. "Mom." "Yes. Do you think someday you'll love again?" The question surprised me, not because it hadn't crossed my mind, but because it hadn't felt urgent in so long. "I think," I said slowly, "that I've learned to love myself in a way I never did before, and that feels like a start." She didn't press, just said, "That's beautiful." And we stayed quiet on the line, letting the waves do the talking. In October, I received a letter, a real one, stamped and hand-addressed, from Gregory. He wrote that he was moving out west, trying to start over, that he'd read one of my essays by accident and it had wrecked him, that he was sorry not just for the betrayal, but for never really seeing me. I didn't reply. Some stories don't need an epilogue, they just need closure. And I had mine by the end of the year. Reclaim Legal had helped 143 women file for financial separation or divorce. We'd connected dozens to safe housing, legal aid, and job training, but the most powerful outcome wasn't on paper. It was in the way they walked into the room, head high, shoulders back, voice steady. The way I had walked out of that backyard in Charleston. On the day someone I loved tried to reduce me to nothing, he didn't know I had already begun building my next life, that in every dollar I'd tucked away, in every document I'd quietly printed, in every call I made to Frankie, I was writing a new ending, not one that ended with revenge, but one that began with truth. This story wasn't about destruction. It was about reclamation. And now, when I speak to rooms full of strangers, I end with the same words every time. Don't wait for someone else to tell you you're worth fighting for. Learn to tell yourself. And always, always someone in the room cries, because they understand, because betrayal wears your last name. But so does your strength. And that, I've learned, can change everything.